Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Upside Avenue educational webinar series. This series is developed with your input. We surveyed our investors and followers to find out what financial and investment topics everyone is interested in learning about. And then we look for subject matter experts all over the country who can speak on these topics. Our hope is to provide you with the knowledge and confidence to manage your finances so you can make better informed investment decisions. We want to make sure you're living your upside. Watch your email for information about March's webinar, and we'll also share it on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Today's webinar is on the exciting topic of how to get your money to flow. Our guest speaker was named a virtual force by Morningstar and recognized by Financial Advisor magazine as a top 10 young advisor to watch in 2017. She's an advocate for financial education and has contributed to publications like Forbes, Business Insider, USA Today, NASDAQ, and the Wall Street Journal. She also teaches her flagship personal finance management course, The Money Flow System, and engages with followers during her weekly Facebook live show, Money Date. When she's not helping her clients and her followers with their financial planning, you can find Anna chasing her 13-month-old son. Please give a warm welcome to our incredibly intelligent friend who we admire so much, from MainStreet Financial Planning, Anna Sergunina.
Good morning, ladies. Good morning, everyone. And good afternoon, because I know we're all kind of spread out, I'm sure probably all over the world. Thanks so much for having me over. I'm excited to share with you this interesting concept. I'm sure a lot of you were intrigued by what is this money flow thing she's talking about. So hang on and stick around, and let's see what I can teach you today. Okay, let's get this out of the way. You don't have to read the fine print, but because my industry is highly regulated, I just have to show it to you. It's all available on our website in case you really wanted to get into. But as you probably know, we're here to provide education and value. So getting started, over the last 15 years as a financial planner, and I am in the space of what's called fee-only financial planning. So I really focus working with clients on creating what we call a money roadmap. And it's like if you remember in the old days, we used to have, before we had our fancy phones, we would print out directions, for example, from MapQuest, and you had like step-by-step instructions. So that's just an idea of how we develop money roadmaps for our clients or financial plans, and really focus on that as opposed to selling products and managing assets. And so a lot of what we also do is education, and this is why you guys wanted me to contribute. But what I've seen and what I worked, the type of clients I worked with over the last 15 years come from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of income levels, asset levels, liability levels, right? So I've seen it all, and our practice is spread out both East Coast and West Coast, so the different parts of the country and so forth. But what I also have seen is a trend, is that most successful clients have a really good handle on where their money is at and how it's being tracked, and they have systems in place. But success is a very interesting word, and I don't really define success, right, in the amount of wealth you have, although you can certainly start kind of measuring that. Not amount of income, or you have a lot of debt, or you have a little debt, or no debt, but rather the ability for you to reach your financial goals. And this is the big one, because most of us don't really have clearly defined financial goals. Now, we'll have to do another presentation on just this topic alone, but in my presentation today, what I want to share with you is how you can actually create a system that's going to allow you to put all of these, for some clients, it seems like mundane pieces, right, of budgeting, bill pay, income, expenses, and really create a system that allows that flow that I'm talking about. So as you're tuning in, how does this sound? I hope you're intrigued. And it is really my belief that, and because I've seen this work personally, right? I've done this myself for many years, and I've seen clients implement this. If you have the right system and the right tools, which I'm going to share with you, you really can create a stress-free environment, because a lot of stress, and you probably know, can be caused by uncertainty as to what's going on in your financial life. And so what is this money flow system I'm talking about, or what is this money flow concept? It's really started with a concept in my mind that I was trying to solve for the struggles I was having. But over time, it became a system. And so it really allows you never have to worry about budgeting. Nobody likes to budget. We know that. Probably 2/3 of population don't have a budget, or if they have one, they never really stick to it. It helps you really get in control of your debt, or help you pay it off if you have some, right, and create a specific plan, or stop accumulating it, because that's another reason why stress is causing us to worry about our finances. It allows you to pinpoint where you have understanding about your income and your expenses, never have to miss any bills, and then finally really have an idea where all of your monies is at. And the reason I want to focus on those pieces today is because in the world we live now, where we make money in all kinds of ways. Our income comes in different formats. It could be a 9-to-5 job. It could be a side hustle that we have. It could be our investments, which I'm assuming for many of you on this webinar today is the case. So however your income comes in, it may not have that regularity that you want. But let's face it, every month we have to face a certain amount of bills that we pay, and so we have to be responsible with that. So the big question is, how do you manage on even cash flow in the world like this, and really have a system that's stress-free? So that was the goal that I wanted to achieve, or struggles I personally had, because my husband and I both own our own businesses. And for those who may be business owners, it's not predicted every month that you're going to have a paycheck, especially if you have to make sure that your employees get paid first. So this is kind of where it's all coming from. And so what I want to start with is this. I want you to kind of start not only focusing, oh my gosh, she's going to tell us these steps of how this money process can help us put it all together. But it's really not just that. I will give you all the steps. You're going to have it. But I want you to start developing a new mindset. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard of this concept, which is cash is king, right? And it's great, right? If we all had a ton of cash, then all of our problems will be solved. But when you start looking into the reality of how our lives are structured, it's not necessarily that we have cash sitting aside, right? It's more of we have a cash flow, right? That's coming in every month, every quarter, every so often, right? Whatever that frequency is. So I want to propose a new way of thinking, which is cash flow is the queen. Now, we're not going to get into who has more power here, but because we're focusing on the flow today, and the cash flow is the component of that, I wanted just to kind of start introducing this concept. And what you should be asking yourself as I keep presenting my ideas to you is, how can I get my own cash flow in the right directions, right? And not just income, but also expenses in the whole system together, because it really is a system. Now, talking about systems, the first critical step, right, in achieving that balance is actually creating a system, because it's crucial in implementing anything. And it could be something very simple, or it could be something, complex as you actually grow with it. But why is it crucial, and why is it important? It really helps to solve a few common issues that I see as an advisor my clients face. And I've come through these phases as well. It helps to solve that question about uneven cash flow, right? It helps us create a mechanism, right, for tracking. It helps us create a sanity in a busy world, right? Because let's face it, there's very few people out there who literally check in with their finances on a daily basis. I really probably spend most of my time looking at other people's finances versus my own. A lot of us don't know how to. We never take any training courses, right, to begin with, not in high school, not in college. I didn't. And I know a lot of people really don't until it becomes an issue. And then I mentioned stress, right? We are stressed out from various angles, and finances cause more of that. So that's where system is critical, because it's going to help you eliminate all of those issues one by one, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So, and I'm sure you understand that. Now, the second important point here is that to make sure we have the right tools in place. And I'll show you all the tools that you need to gather, right, in order for the system to come together. So let's kind of start from the beginning. Now, as I understand, you guys are going to get the slides after the presentation. So you can take notes, you can take screenshots now, but you're going to get the actual slides, which will have all of this charts and diagram. But if I had to give you a snapshot of what are we talking today, this is it. This is your money flow system as I see it. Now, I'm going to go through each of the sections and walk you through of how it's set up and how it actually really fits into everything that you're doing with your finances, how it fits into making sure that you understand the basic things, right? Like your fixed expenses and your variable expenses. You understand how to set it up. You can start modifying to any way you want. But then also, how does this really help you get that clarity, right? And get the stress out of your life. So as you guys have questions throughout the presentation, I'm going to try to pay attention here to the Q&A box. Please let me know. And if I don't see it, then I'm happy to answer it when we're done. Okay, just some concepts might be boring. So your very first tool is this. This is your outline. When you get the slides, I'm going to share a link with you to the actual workbook that's going to allow you to, run through with putting your own numbers, calculating your own expenses, and so forth. But right now, if you want to just keep following along and jot some numbers down, that would be great as well. So as we progress into setting up the tools, we have the actual structure that we're going to set up. So here's a couple of things that would be really handy in making sure that you guys progress. All right, now, when I'm talking about a system, it's not an online app, it's not an online program, you don't have to log in anywhere. It's really just more of organizational structure. And so in order for that to come together, you've got to compile a couple of these things. Now, I'm talking about online logins. Online logins because you need to make sure you could access your checking account, your savings accounts, your credit cards, right? All of those things that allow you to gather the information, because one of the first steps in setting everything up, you've got to come up with your budget numbers. Now, I know some of you may cringe and say, well, I don't really have budget numbers. I don't really budget. And that's okay. I'm with you on that. I'd rather, for you to gather the information and then you can sort through, because you're going to have to start looking at the system as a whole. And spending numbers are quite important, and then income numbers are quite important, and having all of this come together. And then the last but not least is schedule. And you might be wondering, well, what does schedule have to do with any of this, right? It's not a financial tool. It's really not a financial tool, but it's really a tool that I highly recommend for you to implement, and however you want to do it. But I'm really thinking about making sure, if you're setting everything up, blocking some time off on your calendar to set it up initially. And not just that, it's really figuring out in the future how often you have to come back and check in and make sure your system is running properly. And I'll share with you just a little further in our conversation today what I actually do with my own system and my own setup. So as we got all of those tools together, how do we actually put it all in one place? The first step is to make sure that we've got our accounts set up. Now, as you saw on the initial chart, it really is a system of making sure that you have clarity as to how your income comes in, right? If it's not on a regular basis, how can you establish that baseline so that you can make sure you pay your monthly obligations? So for that, you need to have your checking account and savings account, right? And I recommend to have 2 checking accounts and 1 savings account. For those of you who are a little bit more advanced, credit card or credit cards, if you use them and hopefully pay them off at the end of the month, are also helpful. And then of course, right? Because we're talking about, and I hope that you're uneven cash flow, right? If it comes in from your investment accounts, how can you make sure that they're feeding into your system? So those would be the critical elements for you to set up right away. And so here's the graphical view of what it looks like to begin with. Now, we will figure out at some point what that paycheck looks at the top. Now, it could be that you really are getting a paycheck, right? Every 2 weeks, every week, bi-weekly. For example, in my business, we get paid once a month. So that's the frequency. But I know some investments pay out dividends on quarterly basis, right? Some, maybe you get distributions every so often, right? Or maybe you don't even take out your distributions, you just reinvest it. But so whatever that top line is, however that flow is going to establish that baseline of what your paycheck is. Now, we're going to get further into developing and understanding, right, of how much money needs to be split into 2 different checking accounts. Now, I'll tell you the reasoning behind 2 checking accounts. And when I was really struggling with this, it was for a simple reason. Because if you think about this, and some of you may already have something similar, because every time I share this with clients, they say, "Oh yeah, I already have a second checking account. I pay my mortgage out of it, or I pay for my property taxes out of it, or some irregular bills that don't come through on a monthly basis," and that's fine. But what I wanted to see, the clarity I wanted to gain from having something like this was this: I wanted to make sure that my fixed and variable expenses had been taken care of. The most important was for me at the beginning are the fixed expenses, right? And so I'm giving you some of the ideas, right? This is not a complete list because it's a mile long, and we'll have variations there. But most basic things like roof over our head, rent or mortgage, right? Household maintenance, auto payments, insurance. One of the things that I really make a lot of emphasis on, and you can see it here at the bottom of my list, are savings in various categories. And if we have debts that we're working through, because what I want to make sure personally and professionally for my clients is that they have specific targets, right? As far as what the savings have to be, how much more do we have to pay towards debt in order for those goals to come through. So those numbers, and that's what I was mentioning to you earlier, you can work through this in the workbook that we'll share with you. You can figure out all of those together. And so when you add up your totals, that becomes your fixed expense. And the reason it's nice to sit in a separate account is because you know what it is every month. You don't have to worry about it. It varies, but slightly, right? And the one other thing that I also have done and recommend for everyone too is to establish a deadline by which all of these bills can be paid. And if you want to go further, you can set them up on auto pay. So you see my note here that they can be paid by the 15th of the month, which is true for me. So really, if you think about it, for the second part of the month on any given month, I don't really check that fixed expense account. I look at it, right? Because if you log into your bank online or on your phone, on your, in the app, you can still see it, but it's not much going on there. And the second part, which is the variable expense category, and this is really more open for your imagination in terms of what you want to call variable, right? Because some argue that groceries or things like that could be more of the fixed category. Fine, if you really stick to a strict shopping budget and things like that. But whatever that is, it's to your discretion. And so when you start to identify what those expenses are, and I hope that you guys, if you haven't yet, there's a lot of tools online. They're free tools that allow you to track your spending across multiple accounts, across your credit cards, across your checking accounts. I'm talking about mint.com. I've been a long-term user. Personal Capital is another great service. They have other options that you can utilize, right, for investment management and things like that. But at the very basic, really could give you a good reality check where you spend all your money. Just if you haven't set it up, try it out for a month, and you really will start seeing where things are going, because that will give you a sense. Because I know most people don't really realize what their actual variable expenses are, right? We all pretty much know what the fixed are because we got to face them every month. And so that's what becomes now kind of the two runways, if you will, right? One is a fixed kind of side, the other is variable that has fluctuations. Now, something else to mention as well, and this is really relevant to a lot of you here, right? And I think, you know, pretty much anyone out there today, because the way that we have opportunity to earn income is something what I like to call a curveball account. Now, for all of you out there, this is really referring to an emergency fund, right? A rainy day fund. But what I want you to think about is, okay, so what happens if my income isn't consistent, right? Or what happens if there's an extra expense I didn't anticipate, right? And so that's what really defines emergency fund is what if emergency comes up and I need to come up with additional money. Now, as you can see there, I mean, you can put a lot of different definitions what goes into the emergency fund, but at the very minimal is, can you have enough reserves there for 3 to 6 months worth of your fixed and variable expenses. Now, what I want you to really get out of this, and I think a lot of you've heard of this concept, right? Emergency fund, a prudent step in creating, sound financial plan. But you just see these little arrows kind of feeding into each side of either fixed or variable expenses. So what I'm trying to set up here is to have reserves, right? Or to have a backup system in case I face a month, right, where my income hasn't hit that threshold that I'm needing, right, to fit the fixed expenses and variable. But because I know what they are, right, I can kind of see it ahead of time and say, all right, well, maybe this month I'm short $1,000 in my fixed bucket, right? Or really, I would probably never put my fixed expenses, right, or my fixed account into that position because I've got to make sure those are paid. So it's the variable is the one that's going to be discretionary, and that's the one that I can, scale back. For example, don't have to go out to eat as much or whatever, right? You kind of choose what you have to cut back on. But that's where you can kind of go to as a reserve and get the funds as you need it, okay? Now, something else that really worked for my family, and if you have significant other with whom you're sharing your finances, we really only have access in terms of like immediately pulling cash out is our variable expense account. And that's where you have a debit card attached to. Fixed expense account is just a checking account that we specifically said not to give us a debit card because it's really not necessary at all. And as you can do online transfers, if you really have to, but it really serves as a pass through for paying the bills. And so debit card helps us, if you have to go get the cash out of the ATM. And so now when we start to piece all of these sections together, now you should start to see how it starts to flow. So for example, if you had a paycheck, right, I'm going to just use round numbers for the sake of the example. I had a paycheck that, let's say $5,000 a month, and 50% of that went into checking account number one, 50% went into your variable expense account, and then that allowed you to pay for all of the expenses, but you really needed only $4,000, right? Then, you would have discretionary or disposable income. And this is really the goal. If you can get to a point where you make more than you spend, right? You probably guys have heard about this concept, then that gets you onto the path of financial success, or helps you actually focus more on savings and doing the discretionary things. But in case where you don't, let's say one month you have $4,000 income and your overall expense numbers are $5,000, this is where you can dip into your curveball or emergency fund account to help you, fulfill that shortfall. Something else that I wanted to mention, and some of you might be good with credit cards and really are responsible to pay them off at the end of the month. It took us personally a while as a family to graduate, right, from just having 2 checking accounts and not really using credit cards. But we have, and so now my husband and I have a joint credit card, and so we charge pretty much everything in this box over here and more. I even pay for daycare with a credit card because they give me great miles, right? Excuse me. So, but I pay it off at the end of the month, even though daycare is not a variable expense, right? So I start to kind of mix and match because it's a fixed bill that has to get paid every month. But because I have a structure and I have a feel for it, I can play those kind of games, if you will. Because if you're working on, if there's debt present, right, whether it's credit card debt, student loans, or whatever you have, it probably is better to not introduce it into the overall system and try it out without it for the time being. And then if you feel more comfortable that you have control of your own spending, then of course, why not? Because there's benefits of doing that. So here's the playbook that I mentioned to you that you can download. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything. I go in a lot more details. You'll get the workbook, the charts, and so forth, that you can actually work through in creating this for yourself. And remember, I mentioned schedule, right? Or setting up blocks of time in order for you to implement all of this. And I would probably, if I have to guess initially, because again, I've done this over the years, and it's also kind of more, trial and error, but I probably would give it a few hours initially to really set it up and work through. A lot of people get stuck into figuring out their kind of a fixed and variable side of things, but that's why I think having specific tools that allow you to track your expenses more passively for a while will really shine light onto that. Also, for those of you who do use credit cards, you get year-end summaries of all of your spending. So take a look at those. We're really early into the calendar year, so you probably have your 2019 summaries somewhere in your, however you get them, by mail or email. So take a look at that. That really should give you a snapshot, not complete, but somewhat of a snapshot of where your spending is. So check it out. It's free to use, and let me know if you have questions. I love this concept. It's really, if, as I would call, kind of basic first building blocks of a financial plan, but it's a really solid foundation if you have it. And if you have ideas how to make it even better, I would love to hear your feedback. So here are my kind of best practices, if you will, that really help. And I mentioned this to you at the beginning, that the idea is for you to have a system. And when you have a system or process, it really should be all about managing it, right? Because I don't want to create, and I didn't want to have something that I have to constantly be paying attention to, right? Of course, you have to over time. So a couple of things that I do on a regular basis, which weekly, what I call money dates. Now, I had to come up with a cute kind of a term in order to get my husband interested in talking about this stuff, because he said, well, you sort of deal with this, spending and expenses and stuff like that. I'll worry about everything else. And I was like, okay, well, let's just have a quick money date, right? Because money dates seem to be exciting kind of a topic. But it really was a sit down for both of us in a short conversation once a week, is to see, all right, so how are we doing with our system, right? And because really he still isn't managing the fixed side of things, and that's pretty much on autopilot. All I do is, and because I mentioned to you, and I really like it personally, I use mint.com. You can have an app on your phone or log in online. I just log in and it gives me kind of a snapshot of what the balances are across all of the accounts, right? And I really have 3. Checking savings and 2 checking and 1 savings. Of course, all of the investment accounts, but also credit cards, right? Or credit card. So it kind of gives me that snapshot. There are other tools, but this is what works. This is all you do, is just take a look and see how does this stack up with where you're supposed to be. Now, the reason for frequent conversations versus monthly is because if something is off, if you're deviating from the plan, right? Or if situation came up, you had an unusual expense, right? Or if you see that you aren't going to get the income you were anticipating, you have time, right, to make corrections. Because if you only attain to this once a month, which I think most of us do, because you've got to pay your bills somehow, right? Whether they're set up on auto pay or you write checks, it may be too late for you to figure this out. So I would recommend weekly check-ins. It takes virtually no time. And on a monthly basis, it would be more of looking through everything to make sure you got all the expenses that come through. I also check the credit card bills to see how things, are there unusual transactions and things like that, just to check off everything. And that normally takes me like an hour, if that. And that's it. And so really, if you're committing to something on a regular basis, it's not a ton of time. But as I mentioned about the schedule, it really just setting up initially, and then working it into your busy life, into your schedule, and see how it fits with what you got going on. And of course, because we're all thinking about, all right, so if I have the uneven cash flow, or it changes from time to time, what I also found, really, so it wasn't so much about the system when I started to think about it. It was really so much about establishing what's that baseline. So if anything, if you do this exercise, right, just sit down, print out that chart that I had for you on one of the slides, just figure out what your baseline is, because it gives you so much clarity and understanding. Say, okay, well, I've got to have whatever my number is, $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 a month. And that kind of has, have that number in the back of your head. And so it's just so much more powerful when you know. And that was the really whole idea of how it all came together. So I am at the end of my presentation. Would love to see if you guys had any questions.
I'm going to jump in real quick, Anna, and thank you so much for that presentation. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask Anna your questions. And I'm going to start off with one. You talked about how to integrate technology into the system, and it's a quick system to set up, but at what point, when I'm using the system, does investing come in? Where would I know that I'm ready to start investing, even if it's just like with Upside Avenue, a $2,000 investment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think if I let me go back to, I want to have the chart on the screen. I think it's going to help answer that question. Now, I mentioned earlier that if you really sit down and work through figuring out what your fixed and variable expenses are, it should really shine light onto what, if you know your income, right, what your discretionary income is. So if you haven't really set goals for what the savings targets should be, right, and I have both here for retirement or for investments, like, if you want to invest $2,000 into Upside fund, right, or if you really want to add additional money to your debt payment. So kind of wait on those first and see what this discretionary income is. And then it's going to give you an idea, okay, well, maybe you have $500 when everything is said and done. Because the idea is not to, this is not a budgeting system. That's why I said it's really more about where is that freedom for you to do the things you want. And so if investments is the goal, and I know it should be for a lot of you, because that's how you create wealth, right? And you create passive income. That's where I would start looking at, is where do I find that discretionary monies? And this is also like a check-in system with yourself to say, all right, well, what does have to be scaled back? Now, that's a normal way of looking at things. I'd rather you focus on how can you create more income. But if you don't have the base under control, it's hard to, hard to see it.
Thank you so much for that. Does anybody else have a question? Please feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll read your question out, and Anna would be more than happy to answer it. Okay, well, Anna, would you mind, we don't have any questions now, but I'm sure you will have questions in the future. So if you'll show your, yep, there we go. If you want to reach out to Anna, her contact information is listed here. She teaches her personal finance management course, Money Flow System, and you can find information about that on her website. Please do download that tool she offered. And then you can also catch her on her weekly Facebook live show, Money Date. So Anna, thank you so much for the information you shared with us today. I know I'm going to go home and put this system to work for myself. I may be emailing you.
Yes, totally. For sure. And if, like I said, if anybody has questions outside of this presentation, if you're working through it, just email me, let me know. I'd love to see how it's coming together for you. And if I think part of this webinar, we decided to offer, if you guys want to talk about other kind of topics besides cash flow and expenses, I'm happy to do that. And I think there's a code right here. You can email me and let me know that you're part of the webinar, and I'm happy to set up a chat with you and see what other questions I can answer for you.
Yep, that's a 30-minute free consultation. You can see the code right there on your screen upside. Everyone, look out for registration information about March's webinar in your email as well, and we'll share to Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining us today. We want to see where your upside is going to take you with Upside Avenue. We provide access to professionally managed, diversified portfolio of income-producing multifamily real estate for as little as $2,000. You can visit our website, upsideavenue.com, or send us an email or call us with any questions you have as well. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.